On the first half, we're fighting two waves, each consisting of two Eremite Summoners. Most of you are probably already familiar with these guys, but the key thing to remember in this fight is to focus on their pets. When their pets die, they lose about a third of their current HP, a ton of resistances, and their CC immunity. The sooner you can kill their pets, the more time you can spend dealing actually meaningful damage to the Eremites themselves. That having been said, what we don't want to do is chase down each pet individually with single target damage. Since we're going to be fighting 4 enemies at the same time throughout most of this fight, large AoE attacks are really what we're looking for on this half. In this example, I'm using a hyper carry Raiden team. Raiden's burst, which has a really long-reaching frontal range, combined with Kazuha's big circle burst and his overloaded procs, we get a ton of AoE damage. You can see just how effective this is at killing those pets quickly, even when we're not necessarily keeping track of where they are. If we're able to kill the pets at the same time while the Eremites are still close to each other, the fight becomes much easier. One thing that you do still need to watch out for, especially if you're using Bennett on this half, is this Dendro attack on the second wave. If you get hit by this while you're standing inside Bennett's burst and you're infused by that pyro aura, you will take a ton of burning damage from this attack. So always be watching out for that green circle and either get ready to dodge it or iframe it with a burst like I do here. Aside from this team, teams with strong AoE damage are great on this half. If you're looking for a more budget option, then this overloaded variant of the national team works pretty well for me here. Again, leveraging characters like Xiangling and Beidou who can deal damage to multiple enemies at the same time, while triggering those overloaded reactions for even more AoE damage. Looking at a more expensive team here, freeze teams also work really well in this half. Obviously, being able to keep all the enemies in place makes it a lot easier to deal damage to all of them at the same time. If you have Venti, you even get a nice bonus of being able to pull together the Eremite Summoners on the second wave, taking advantage of that brief moment right after they spawn when they don't have that CC immunity. Some other characters that I unfortunately don't have, but I've seen perform really well here, are Xiao and Neuvillette. Both of them are characterized by, again, being able to deal consistent large AoE damage, which is the recurring theme on this half. Xiao with his big plunge attacks and Neuvillette with his continuous piercing charge attack, both are a really good fit for the enemies that we're fighting here. On the second half, we are welcoming back the notorious Wenut. I have a much more detailed breakdown of this fight in a previous video that I made, so I won't be going into as much detail this time, but the key in this fight is to recognize the boss's 5-stage attack pattern and use that knowledge to not only position yourself appropriately, but also time your bursts so that you're outputting damage at the right times. The boss starts with either this plunging attack or this flyby attack. Regardless of which one it uses, this is usually where I spend time to get my buffs ready or cast my long-lasting abilities like Xingqiu's burst or Nahida's skill. For the second attack, the boss breaches the surface in the bottom left corner of the arena. This is the first window where you can actually deal a decent amount of damage, assuming all of your buffs and off-field abilities are ready to go. On the third attack, the boss will emerge in the opposite corner of where it just was and channel a laser beam for a few seconds. Even though this one seems like a good opportunity to attack, I actually also treat this as a setup window, mostly because we lose a lot of time running across the arena to get here. So I use this chance to recharge my energy if I need to, refresh my buffs, getting ready for the next attack. For the fourth attack, the boss breaches the surface one more time, very close to where it used its last attack. And again, since we use this last window to set up our combo, we can use this one as an attack window and try to deal as much damage as possible. For the fifth and final attack, the boss starts to fly in a spiral and these animo bubbles start to form around it. We need to pop at least 2 of these bubbles using Pyro, Cryo, Hydro, or Electro, so we can bring the boss down and into its vulnerability phase. In my experience, the easiest way to do this is to use a large AoE attack right around here when the boss dips down as you're facing the front of the arena. As I'm doing this, I also treat this as a setup window so that by the time the boss falls down, I'm ready to deal damage again. And this will be the main window where we can deal most of our damage. After the boss gets up, we just repeat the same pattern. Now, Nahida Hyper Bloom is a really good team comp for this boss because it outputs a lot of single target DPS, the Hyper Bloom missiles can hit it from really far away, and it has really good damage uptime. In other words, you can consistently deal damage throughout the whole rotation with this team. But what that also means is that it's a little bit harder to distinguish the setup windows and the attack windows in the way that I was describing it. So I want to show you this fight one more time using a different team where taking advantage of those timing windows is a lot more important. This Hu Tao team is a really popular team that's taken into this second half, and rightfully so because it outputs a ludicrous amount of single target DPS. But if you're unfamiliar with the boss's attacks and missing these timing windows, it can be surprisingly difficult to clear this fight even with a team as strong as this one. As we go into the fight, I immediately use Zhongli's shield, Xingqiu's burst, and Yelan's burst, and this is what I consider the setup of this team comp. It's only when you have these three things enabling Hu Tao that she can output some meaningful damage. Now that we have these buffs ready, when the second attack comes around, we can use that entire window just to deal damage. Then on the third attack, we're going to recharge our energy, again use Xingqiu and Yelan's burst, get those ready first so that we don't have to spend time using them when Hu Tao wants to attack. On the boss's fourth attack, again we already have all of our buffs ready to go, so Hu Tao can spend that entire window just dealing damage. And we keep repeating this pattern, setting up, dealing damage, recharging energy, setting up, dealing damage, recharging energy. Getting used to this rhythm is really the key to this fight, and making sure your team has enough energy recharge and getting your rotation down consistently will help you achieve this. Aside from these two teams we've seen so far, Hyper Carry Raiden teams can also do pretty well here. Similar to how Hu Tao works, Raiden outputs a spike of DPS while her burst is active. So if we can align that with those attack windows we've been talking about, she's a really solid choice against this boss. Lastly, there is also this 4-star budget variation of the Hyper Boom team that can work here. It is pretty difficult to execute and requires a lot of investment, so I would consider this only as a last resort if you don't have Raiden, Nahida, or Hu Tao. This is a notoriously difficult boss, so if you have any other team comp suggestions that work well for you, please do share them in the comments. I hope this video made this boss a little bit more approachable, and as always, thank you so much for watching.